Welcome to Instant Deck Techs. The aim of this series is to give you a short, concise guide on how to build a certain deck. It won't cover every card, but we'll go through all the categories and go over the types of cards needed to make the deck work. Any card mentioned will be down in the description below. The commander of this deck is Tatsunari Toad Rider. It is 2 and a black for a 3/3 legendary creature, Human Ninja. It has, whenever you cast an enchantment spell, if you don't control a creature named Kaimi, create Kaimi, a legendary 3/3 black and green frog creature token with, whenever you cast an enchantment spell, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. It also has, pay 1 and either a blue or a green, to give it and target frog you control can't be blocked this turn except by creatures with flying or reach. Importantly, this is a sultai commander because of their activated ability, so this is going to be a sultai Enchantress deck with a Voltron subtheme. Let's quickly go over what the deck is trying to do before we jump into the individual sections. This deck is going to be using as many enchantments as possible to fill up all the different slots that we need. We'll be using them for our card draw, for our ramp, for our interaction, and also as ways of winning the game. Kaimi the Toad, being a Grim Guardian that we can get from the command zone, means that we'll be continually draining out our opponents throughout the game. Then, the activate ability on Tatsunari, where we make it and a frog basically unblockable until end of turn, means that we can use enchantments to buff them both up, to swing through and deal those final bits of damage that we need to win the game. Kicking off with some card draw, we have a good selection of spells available to us. First up is the classic Enchantress cards, spells that draw us a card when enchantments enter the battlefield under our control. With the amount of enchantments that will be running, it should be pretty easy to see just how many additional cards these will draw us throughout the game. Next up is Erebos, God of the Dead. 1 black and 2 life for a card is perfectly fine, and the bonus life gain hate for our opponents will come in really handy with this deck, as we are trying to drain them all out with Kaimi. The next option is cards that draw us cards when we deal damage to an opponent. We effectively have 2 unblockable cards in the command zone, so using these to draw us cards when we swing through will be really nice. Moving over to our ramp, enchantment decks tend to work a little bit differently to more traditional decks, primarily in the fact that we want to use enchantments to gain us mana. Those come in the form of wild growth effects, auras that attach themselves to lands that give them the ability to generate extra mana. These are fantastic in this kind of build, as they'll trigger all the other effects that we care about when enchantments enter the battlefield, all while ramping us ahead. What works well with these is cards that untap lands. When your lands are generating more than 1 mana, these can really add up and ramp us ahead. If you're running these, then in your land section, I would also look at running lands that naturally tap for more than 1 mana, things like the Ravening of Bounce lands or something like Ancient Tomb. There are also enchantments that go and search out lands from the deck, which are really nice as it generally means they won't be on the board long enough to ever get removed. Then, there are just some good cards that help us ramp ahead, but all do slightly different things. Sanctum Weaver will be able to tap for a ton of mana in this deck. Then you have Herald of the Pantheon, which reduces the cost of enchantments, while also giving us a nice little bit of life gain boost. And then of course you have Courser of Kruphix, which is one of the best enchantment creatures out there, so I could very easily see it having a spot in this build. Moving over to our interaction, I'm mainly going to be focusing on the synergistic options, but as always, this section really depends on your playgroup. The more competitive the meta, the more you want to be packing instants. But again, we're going synergistic, so we're going to be looking to have them all on enchantments. Cards like Kenrith's Transformation, Imprisoned in the Moon, and Song of the Dryads are among the strongest answers in Commander, as specifically they turn off our opponent's commanders rather than giving our opponents the option to recast them, meaning that you're effectively nerfing their deck until they are removed. After those, there are just some solid bits of removal on enchantments. What you lose in instant speed interaction, you get back from the fact that these will play into everything else the deck is trying to do. A lot of the time in this deck, these cards won't just say their regular text. With our commander and our enchantress effects out, they'll also say deal 1 damage to each opponent, gain 1 life, and draw a card. That is one hell of a deal. This could also be a deck where attrition works really nicely, as our commander makes a frog token whenever we cast an enchantment. When combined with this, means that effectively attrition is a repeatable kill engine. For some board wipes, we have Phyrexian Scriptures and Doomwake Giant. Again, you lose a little bit of efficiency, but again, all those benefits from them being enchantments more than make up for it. Protection will be a very important part in this deck. An Enchantress deck runs a bit like an engine, so keeping key pieces around will be a priority. First up is cards that protect our enchantments and our creatures. These all being enchantments themselves is exactly where we want them to be, and again, will mean things like our commander and our enchantresses are just a little bit harder to remove. Talking of protecting our commander, we can also use some enchantments that either give it totem armor, or with cards that means that it can't be targeted. The buff from the totem armor effects will also be very nice when we start swinging in. Then it is also worth mentioning Swiftfoot Boots and Lightning Greaves. The added haste I think will be important enough to consider running them, even though they aren't enchantments themselves. Moving over to win cons, as we went over at the start, there really are 2 ways that this deck wants to win the game. The first is with drain effects off of Khalni the Toad. To make the most out of that, we can start by doubling up that effect, either with a Grim Guardian or with clone effects that let us copy a legendary creature, as obviously having 2 of those effects out will drain out our opponents twice as fast. After those, you have cards like Shimmering Wings and Wisp Silk. These are cheap enchantments you can bounce back to your hand and replay over and over to drain out your opponents. The other way of winning the game is by hitting people in the life total with our commander. Cards like Ancestral Mask, Helm of the Gods, and Nettlecyst take all that hard work we've been doing in building up an enchantment board state and turn it into damage on our evasive commander. After those, you can look at running some enchantments that do a good job in buffing up our creatures. I personally love Rancor. Just sticking this on Khalni the Toad, early on, even without having to activate the evasion, will still get through a load of damage over the game. Then Night Howler can get scary big in the late game, after all those board wipes. And then it doesn't take too many enchantments for Nylea's Colossus to make our commander absolutely huge. There are also some other ways of letting our creatures swing through. Bower's Passage makes it so only creatures with reach can block our commander or toad friend. Then Archetype of Imagination grounds all our opponent's creatures while giving our whole board flying. The fact they're both enchantments is obviously really nice. Rounding off the deck with some utility lands, we've already mentioned that with the untappers we're running, lands that tap for more than 1 mana are really nice in the deck. The fact the bounce lands are also fixing works really well. Alchemist's Refuge is a really nice inclusion as it gives our enchantment-based removal flash. And then, if you're running Wisp Silk that we mentioned in our win cons, running Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth is really nice as it means we'll have access to extra green mana. The rest of your mana base will be very dependent on what you have available to you. We've recently released a video with some advice on building a deck with a budget mana base, which might be of help. Until next time, please like, share and subscribe, and let us know down in the comments if there are any commanders you'd like to see a deck tech on. Thank you very much for watching.